It just proves how wrong you are about being in bed all stove up like you are and saying whether you ought or hadn't ought. You ain't, you are.
Ken Curtis made millions laugh as Festus on Gunsmoke. He looked like a simple cowboy who had it all figured out.
If you wanted to be like Anderson, the first thing you'd have to learn to do was lie with a straight face.
Well, I could keep a straight face for $5,000.
Well, meantime, why don't you just open up your face and put some pie in it?
But behind that scruffy beard and scratchy voice was a man who grew up sleeping above a jail, lost a child he never got to hold, was accused of horrible things by one of Hollywood's most powerful men, and carried grudges against 5 people to his grave. This is the story nobody told you. The man behind Festus and the life nobody saw. Curtis Wayne Gates came into the world on July 2, 1916, in the dusty farming town of Lamar, Colorado. It was a place most people have never heard of, tucked into a part of the country that the Great Depression would nearly wipe off the map. For the first 10 years of his life, the Gates family lived on a ranch along Muddy Creek in Bent County. It was hard, flat land where the wind never stopped, and farming felt like a war you fought every single day. But inside the house, there was always a song playing. His father, Dan, played the fiddle. His mother, Nellie, played the pump organ. Brother Chester played banjo, and Carl sang. Young Curtis picked up the clarinet and played it in the school marching band. Music was not a hobby in the Gates household. It was the one thing that made the hardship bearable. Then, in 1926, Dan Gates ran for sheriff of Bent County and won. The family packed up and moved to Las Animas, the county seat. But their new home was not a house. It was the county jail. While other kids played in backyards, Curtis grew up surrounded by iron bars and slamming cell doors. His mother cooked meals for the inmates, and Curtis watched her serve food through the bars every single day. One of the regulars who kept cycling through the jail was a local drifter named Cedar Jack, a rough-talking eccentric whose nasally twang and colorful personality would later become the blueprint for Festus Hagen. The Great Depression hit southeastern Colorado harder than almost anywhere in the country. The Dust Bowl destroyed everything. Curtis graduated from high school as a football quarterback and band clarinetist, and his parents pushed him toward medicine. He enrolled at Colorado College but dropped out after 2 years because music would not let him go. He headed to Los Angeles with nothing but a voice and a prayer. That gamble paid off in ways nobody expected. He joined Tommy Dorsey's orchestra and stepped into the spot Frank Sinatra had just left. He served in the army during World War II in Italy. He sang with the legendary Sons of the Pioneers and took Room Full of Roses to #1. He married Barbara Ford, the daughter of the most powerful director in Hollywood, and appeared in 12 John Ford films alongside John Wayne. He trimmed his father-in-law's toenails just to stay in the inner circle. Then, in 1958, Barbara became pregnant, and everyone was overjoyed. But she suffered a miscarriage, and doctors told them she could never have children. The loss devastated the entire family. By 1964, the marriage collapsed. After the divorce, John Ford publicly accused Curtis of being a wife-beater in interviews. No evidence ever supported the claim, but it came from one of the most respected men in cinema, and the accusation followed Curtis for years. At his lowest point, Curtis found a lifeline in a character that was never supposed to come back. On December 8, 1962, a scruffy hillbilly named Festus Hagen appeared on Gunsmoke for what everyone assumed would be a single episode and nothing more. But audiences went wild. Over the next 11 years, Curtis appeared in 304 episodes as Festus, becoming the heart of the show. He pulled the character's voice straight from Cedar Jack and the people of his Colorado childhood. In a 1964 interview, he laughed and said he sometimes thought he got the role because he had the mangiest beard in Hollywood. But behind the laughter and that scratchy voice, Curtis was quietly carrying the names of 5 people who had wronged him. People whose names he would carry with bitterness for the rest of his life. Number 5. James Arness and the shadow that swallowed everything. James Arness was not just the star of Gunsmoke. He was a giant in every sense of the word. He stood 6 feet 7 inches tall. He had survived being nearly killed by machine gun fire at Anzio Beach during World War II. And he walked with a slight limp for the rest of his life, from a leg wound that never fully healed. When John Wayne personally recommended him for the role of Marshal Matt Dillon, it launched a 20-year run that became the longest of any primetime dramatic series with a single lead actor in television history. For the rest of the cast, living in that enormous shadow was an unspoken daily reality that shaped everything about their experience on the show. Every storyline revolved around Matt Dillon. Every scene was framed to make the Marshal the center of attention. Every guest star came and went. But Arness remained the one constant that the entire production orbited around. Ken Curtis understood this hierarchy when he signed on. But understanding something and accepting it are 2 very different things, especially when your character starts becoming more popular than the lead. As the years passed, something remarkable and uncomfortable began to happen. Festus-centered episodes increased in number and frequency. Fan mail addressed to Ken Curtis started rivaling and, in some seasons, actually surpassing the mail that came in for Arness. At rodeos and personal appearances across the country, it was Festus that crowds wanted to see. The deputy was becoming more beloved than the marshal, and everyone on the Gunsmoke set could feel the shift happening in real time. Arness was reportedly skeptical from the very beginning that Curtis, who was known primarily as a refined singer and member of John Ford's elite circle, could even pull off a rough and uneducated character like Festus. That early doubt stung, and Curtis never forgot it. In a revealing comment about his career, Curtis once said that there was too much sameness to a leading man. On the surface, it sounds like a man at peace with his role. But underneath those words is someone who spent over a decade knowing he would never be allowed to stand in the center of the frame, no matter how much the audience wanted him there. Publicly, Curtis said the right things. In a 1973 Associated Press article, he praised Arness by saying he had been on the show for 10 years, and Jim had not changed one bit. He said he had seen many shows go down the drain because the star became impossible to deal with and was disliked by everyone, but that Jim was terrific to work with. Arness returned the compliment on a DVD special by saying that once Kenny took hold of the role, the whole cast knew they had nothing to worry about. But in later seasons, Arness grew increasingly withdrawn and private. He stopped attending fan events and personal appearances, delegating those responsibilities to Curtis and other supporting cast members. Curtis embraced these opportunities eagerly, building his own fiercely loyal following at rodeos and fairs nationwide. He was doing the work of promoting Gunsmoke while Arness stayed home. He was shaking hands and signing autographs and performing in character while the man who got top billing enjoyed his privacy. 2 fundamentally different men were locked together on the same show for over a decade. One craved solitude and seemed almost indifferent to the spotlight. The other craved recognition and connection, but was structurally prevented from ever getting equal billing. That kind of imbalance does not create dramatic blow-ups. It creates something quieter and, in many ways, more painful. A slow, grinding resentment that builds year after year like dust settling on a Colorado plain until one day you realize you have been breathing it in so long you cannot remember what clean air felt like. Number 4. Milburn Stone and the gatekeeper who decided if you belonged. Milburn Stone had been playing Doc Adams since the very first episode of Gunsmoke in 1955. By the time Ken Curtis walked onto that set, Stone had already spent nearly a decade turning Doc Adams into one of the most iconic characters in the history of American television. He was sharp, opinionated, fiercely protective of his role, and he had a well-known pattern of testing every single person who was new to the show. Stone did not hide this about himself. He openly admitted that he despised James Arness's lack of professionalism during the first 2 seasons. He said he initially felt that Amanda Blake and Dennis Weaver did not belong in the business at all. Those harsh opinions eventually softened into real friendships, but the pattern was crystal clear. If you were the new face on Gunsmoke, Milburn Stone was going to make you earn your place, and he was not going to make it easy or pleasant. Ken Curtis was absolutely no exception to this rule. When he joined the cast, the existing actors had already built a tight rhythm that had been developing for almost a decade. They had inside jokes, unspoken agreements about how scenes would be played, and a hierarchy that everyone understood. Curtis was the outsider walking into a family that had already decided how the dinner table was arranged, and Milburn Stone was the one who decided whether a new guest got to sit down or had to keep standing. What makes this relationship especially complicated is something Stone himself revealed years later in David R. Greenland's book, The Gunsmoke Chronicles. Stone explained the system that operated behind the scenes on the show. He said the big thing that kept Gunsmoke together was the complete absence of professional jealousy. If he did not like a line, or if Jim did not like a line, they would say to give it to somebody else. And when Festus came on the show, they gave him all the stupid lines, and it made a star out of him. That quote deserves a moment to sit with. The veteran actors on Gunsmoke had a practice of taking the comedic and less dignified material they did not want to perform and funneling it directly to the new guy. Curtis took those lines and turned them into gold. It absolutely made him a star, but it also locked him permanently into a very specific box. Festus would always be the one saying the foolish things. The weight, the gravity, and the dignity would always go to Doc Adams and Marshall Dillon. Curtis could be funny, he could be lovable, but he could never be the serious one. Over time, Stone and Curtis did develop a genuine and deep bond. They traveled the rodeo circuit together, doing personal appearances in character as Doc and Festus, performing at fairs and events around the country in what reportedly added up to around 500 shows per year. They attended each other's family events. When Gunsmoke was canceled, Curtis bought Doc Adams's iconic roll-top desk from the set as a personal memento of what they had shared. But the early years of having to prove himself to a man who openly admitted he tested newcomers and initially questioned whether they deserved to be there left a mark on Curtis that never fully faded. And when Curtis was inexplicably excluded from a 1978 CBS 50th Anniversary Reunion special where Arness, Stone, and Weaver all appeared together without him, it was Stone who told the Indianapolis Star that he felt bad because Ken Curtis was not included. Even the person closest to Curtis on the entire show recognized that he kept getting left out, overlooked, and passed over. And the question of why that kept happening haunted Ken Curtis for the rest of his career. This is where the story stops being about whispered tensions and unspoken frustrations and becomes something documented, confirmed, and genuinely ugly. Number 3. John Mantley, and the producer who refused to pay what Festus was worth. John Mantley took over as Gunsmoke's executive producer around 1967, replacing Norman Macdonald. He was a disciplined, tough-minded Canadian who had survived being a prisoner of war during World War II before reinventing himself as a novelist and eventually a television producer. He ran Gunsmoke with the precision of a military operation. Strict budgets, tight script control, a top-down management style that left very little room for actors to push back on decisions about their characters or their pay. Curtis believed that Festus deserved to evolve. He wanted the character to grow beyond the comic sidekick and become a more central and complex figure in Dodge City. He also believed his compensation should reflect the fact that Festus was generating enormous fan response and had become arguably the most popular character on the show after Matt Dillon himself. Mantley did not always share those ambitions for the character, and the tension between the two men simmered throughout the show's later years. But the real explosion came more than a decade after Gunsmoke ended, and it was devastating. In 1987, DIBS announced a reunion television movie called Gunsmoke: Return to Dodge, bringing James Arness back as Marshal Matt Dillon. For millions of fans around the country, a Gunsmoke reunion without Festus was simply unthinkable. Curtis had played the character in 304 episodes across 11 years. He was by far the most popular supporting character in the show's entire 20-year history. There was no version of Dodge City that made sense without Festus Hagen standing in it. The negotiations collapsed almost immediately, and they collapsed for two reasons that fed off each other and made any compromise impossible. The first reason was money. Mantley spoke about it publicly in a TV Guide interview. He said that Curtis wanted twice what Amanda Blake was getting. He told Curtis he could not do that, and Curtis said then he was not coming. And that was how it ended. Curtis felt his compensation should reflect the undeniable fact that Festus was more central to the show's legacy and audience than almost anyone else on the roster. He had given over a decade of his life to Gunsmoke and appeared in more episodes than Blake, Stone, or Weaver. He was not going to accept a lowball offer that he saw as disrespectful. The second reason was the script. Curtis had read and genuinely loved writer Jim Burns' original screenplay for the reunion movie. But the production team made significant revisions that Curtis considered vastly inferior to the original version. He hated the changes. This was not just about a paycheck. It was about artistic integrity and respect for the quality of work that Gunsmoke had always represented. The result was a complete and permanent break between the two men. Curtis told Mantley to never call him again. He was not bluffing, and he was not posturing. He meant it with every fiber of his being. Between 1987 and 1994, 5 Gunsmoke reunion movies aired on national television. Ken Curtis appeared in absolutely none of them. The franchise simply replaced Festus by promoting Buck Taylor's character, Newly O'Brien, to the role of U.S. Marshal. For the millions of fans who had spent 11 years loving Festus Hagen, watching those reunion movies without him felt exactly like sitting down to a family dinner where one chair was deliberately left empty, and nobody would explain why. Curtis never went to the press to trash Mantley. He never did a tell-all interview or gave his side of the story publicly. He just walked away from the thing he loved most in his career and never looked back. For a man who once said that losing Gunsmoke was like losing his whole family, that silence must have been the loudest and most painful thing he ever did. Number 2. Amanda Blake and the Queen of Dodge City who watched her crown slip away. Amanda Blake played Miss Kitty Russell for 19 seasons of Gunsmoke. She was the emotional center of Dodge City. Strong, fiery, independent, and the only woman on the show who could stand toe-to-toe with Matt Dillon and hold her ground. For nearly 2 decades, she was the show's most important female presence and one of its most recognizable stars. Audiences did not just watch Miss Kitty, they loved her. She was the woman everyone in Dodge City trusted, and the woman millions of viewers at home felt they personally knew. Then Festus Hagen showed up, and the landscape began to shift in ways nobody could ignore. As Curtis's popularity exploded through the late 1960s and into the 1970s, the balance of the show changed dramatically. Festus-centered episodes multiplied. Fan mail for Curtis poured in by the bagful and showed no signs of slowing down. The scruffy, lovable deputy was getting the biggest laughs, the most emotional storylines, and an increasing share of the screen time that had once been distributed more evenly among the core cast. Characters who had been prominent for years began drifting further from the center of the action. And Miss Kitty, despite her 19 years of loyalty to the show, was not immune to that drift. The available evidence about Blake's personal feelings toward Curtis is thin and complicated. No specific interviews, crew accounts, or documented incidents confirm any open hostility between the two of them. The INSP television network, which has covered Gunsmoke history more extensively than almost anyone, stated clearly that Blake was close with both Stone and Ken Curtis. But what is thoroughly documented is that Blake's real on-set enemy was producer John Mantley, not Curtis. Their feud escalated throughout the early 1970s over wardrobe disagreements, physically demanding location shoots that Blake felt were unnecessary, and script changes she disagreed with. Writer Jim Burns did not mince words about what happened. He said flatly that she did not quit. Mantley fired her. Blake left after season 19 in 1974. Curtis stayed through season 20 and the series finale. The timing tells a story that words alone cannot capture. A woman who had been the heart of Dodge City for almost 2 decades watched a character who had been on the show for 7 fewer years than her getting more screen time, more fan attention, and a bigger role in the show's creative direction. Whether she held Curtis personally responsible or directed her frustration entirely at Mantley and the production, the reality was the same. Miss Kitty was fading, and Festus was rising. And in Hollywood, watching someone else take what you spent years building is a kind of pain that most people handle poorly, no matter how professional they try to be. What makes this especially interesting is that on screen, the chemistry between Kitty and Festus was natural, warm, and completely believable. Whatever existed behind those cameras, both Curtis and Blake were consummate professionals who never once allowed personal feelings to compromise the work their audience depended on. Number 1. Dennis Weaver and the ghost that haunted every single episode. Before Ken Curtis ever stepped onto the Gunsmoke set as Festus Hagen, Dennis Weaver had already spent 9 years making Chester Good one of the most beloved characters in the entire history of American television. Chester's distinctive limp, his fumbling charm, his unconditional loyalty to Matt Dillon, and his gentle humor made him a character that audiences did not just enjoy watching. They genuinely cared about him. When Weaver decided to leave the show in 1964, after nearly 290 episodes, the question that hung over the entire production was as simple as it was brutal. Who on earth could possibly replace Chester Good? Ken Curtis walked into that question every single day for the next 11 years of his life. The Chester versus Festus debate became one of the most passionate and longest-running arguments in television fandom, and it ignited the very second Curtis appeared on screen. A 1971 newspaper article captured his early anxiety perfectly. He worried openly that he would not be able to fill the large shoes that Weaver had once brought to the show. He was absolutely right to worry. Gunsmoke's audience was fiercely loyal to Chester, and a significant portion of them viewed Festus not as a fresh and welcome addition, but as an unwelcome intruder who had no right to be standing where Chester once stood. Curtis handled the relentless comparison by drawing a sharp and deliberate line between the two characters. He argued in interviews that Festus was a fundamentally different kind of man. He said that Festus did things on his own, while Chester was always whining along behind Matt. This was not a personal attack on Dennis Weaver. It was a survival strategy. Curtis desperately needed audiences to stop measuring him against what they had already lost and start seeing Festus as his own fully realized creation. Weaver himself was gracious about the entire situation. In a 2002 Television Academy interview, he explained that he had simply exhausted all creative possibilities with the character and wanted to pursue leading man roles. There was no conflict in his departure. The rest of the cast supported his decision to move on, and Weaver never said a single negative word about Curtis or the character of Festus in any public forum. But the weight of that comparison was real, it was constant, and it was absolutely relentless. Every review, every fan letter, every conversation at every rodeo and fair and personal appearance came back to the exact same question: are you as good as Chester? Curtis spent 11 years hearing some version of that question in one form or another. 11 years of being compared to a man who was already gone. 11 years of having to prove over and over again that he deserved the seat he was sitting in. James Arness himself wrote that when Weaver left, the cast was genuinely worried about the show's future. But he added that once Kenny took hold, everyone knew they had nothing to worry about. One television historian put it in even stronger terms. He called Festus one of the greatest, if not the single greatest, replacement characters in all of television history. Ken Curtis proved every single doubter wrong. He did not just fill Chester's shoes. He built entirely new ones from scratch. But the sting of always being measured against a ghost, always having to justify his existence on his own show, and always hearing whispers that the original was better, is the kind of wound that does not fully close, even when you know deep down that you have earned your place and won the argument. 3 marriages, 1 betrayal, and the woman who finally saved him. Ken Curtis's love life was a mirror of his career. Early failure, crushing loss, and then finally something real after years of pain. His first marriage was to Lorraine Page, a minor actress at Universal Studios. They married around 1942 in the rush of wartime America. The marriage lasted roughly 8 years, produced no children, and ended so quietly that it barely left a trace in the record. They simply drifted apart. His second marriage nearly destroyed him. In 1952, he married Barbara Ford, the daughter of legendary director John Ford. It gave him access to Hollywood royalty and 12 major films. But it also meant serving a demanding father-in-law who expected total loyalty. In 1958, Barbara became pregnant, and everyone was thrilled. Then she miscarried, and doctors said she could never have children. The marriage collapsed by 1964, and afterwards, John Ford publicly accused Curtis of being a wife-beater in interviews. No proof ever surfaced, but the accusation from one of cinema's most respected men followed Curtis for years. Then, in 1966, at perhaps the lowest point of his life, Curtis met Tori Ahern Connolly. She was not from Hollywood. She was from the rodeo world, warm and genuine, and grounded in ways that the entertainment industry simply was not. They married on March 12, 1966, and Curtis became a devoted stepfather to her 2 children. They were the only children he would ever have. Torrey brought out a different man. In a 1972 interview, Curtis reflected on his values. He said that honor and politeness and deep regard for others were the most important things, and that everyone was a friend until proven otherwise. Then he added that the last part had gotten him into a lot of trouble in Hollywood until he learned the hard way. Torrey was the person who showed him that not everyone in the world would let him down. They settled in Clovis, California, around 1980. Curtis raised Arabian horses. They traveled for pleasure, not for work. Fishing trips, cross-country drives, and small-town rodeos. Fans recognized him everywhere, and Torrey handled it with grace. The Gunsmoke community knew her simply as Mrs. Festus. They were married for 25 years, right up until the very end. His last public appearance was at the Clovis Rodeo on Saturday, April 27, 1991. He looked healthy and happy. The next morning, Torrey woke up and found that Ken had passed away in his sleep from a heart attack. He was 74 years old. No headlines, no hospital scenes, just a quiet exit with the woman who saved him lying right beside him. His ashes were scattered across the flatlands of Colorado, the same land where a little boy once watched Cedar Jack stumble into his father's jail. A statue of Curtis as Festus now stands in Old Town Clovis. In a darkly fitting twist, the original was vandalized within hours of its unveiling. Even in bronze, Festus could not catch a break. Torrey died on November 2, 1997. Her obituary called her the helpmate to her beloved Ken Festus Curtis for almost 30 years. Ken Curtis once said he was really proud of Gunsmoke. He said they put on a good show every week, one that families could all watch together without offending anyone. He never stopped being proud. He never stopped being Festus. And he never stopped being the kid from the jailhouse who just wanted to sing. So what do you think about the grudges Ken Curtis carried all those years? And do you believe they were justified? Drop your thoughts in the comments because we would love to hear which part of his story hit you the hardest.